Good morning and welcome to the Adult Literacy Action Forum, hosted by Literacy Delaware and our partner, Delaware Libraries. I'm Cindy Schermeyer, and I am so pleased that you have been able to join us this morning. All right, just a minute, please. Just a few housekeeping items to get out of the way. Please make sure you are on mute. Feel free to unmute to ask questions during the question and answer period. You can also just drop your question into the chat, which we are monitoring. We are recording the forum, and we'll make both the recording and slides available to you. We are thrilled to have 4 leaders in the field of adult literacy with us today. Next slide. Today's forum would not be possible without the support of Delaware Libraries, United Way of Delaware, Highmark Health Options, and PMG Consulting. Thank you for your belief in the power of adult literacy. Next slide, please. I would like to acknowledge and thank the Literacy Delaware Board of Directors, Carol Bailey, Diane Frenzel, Robert Bailey, Dan Cruz, Judy Mellon, Dr. Andy Norman, Greg O'Neill, Stacy Price, Muli Ravilla, and James Spadola. Their support and advice has been instrumental in moving us forward with new partnerships, ideas, and resources. Next slide, please. In 2023, Literacy Delaware will celebrate 40 years of advancing literacy through training, tutoring, English language acquisition, and advocacy for all Delawareans. Still staying true to adult literacy, but having advocacy, collaboration, and target programming. Next slide, please. We have a great lineup today of adult literacy experts. Proficient literacy skills are a huge contributing factor to economic mobility, workforce, and quality of life throughout Delaware and the country. I applaud the many initiatives in the state to bring literacy to the forefront. Dr. Norman is going to tell you about one such initiative, Communities of Excellence. It is my honor to introduce Delaware's State Librarian, Dr. Annie Norman.
Thank you, Cindy, and thank you everyone for attending today. I'm delighted to be partnering with Cindy to help conquer all the literacy challenges in Delaware. Cindy has so much to share from her experiences with adults that can inform our efforts in early literacy as well. For libraries, libraries are a legacy organization spanning generations. Book immersion is essential for literacy skills and to develop lifelong learners with the reading and library habit across generations. Delaware libraries are connected. We established a statewide library technology infrastructure about 16 years ago. So far, 70 multi-type libraries are sharing over 3 million books and ebooks for the benefit of Delawareans. The powerful shared library system ensures equity of access and capacity so that an abundance of quality books are available to all, regardless of economic circumstances. Book immersion, by also connecting public and school libraries, which is our weakest link with the greatest potential, would ensure that all Delaware children have equitable access to books, regardless of whether they are taken to the public library, and for ensuring an equitable culture of reading for Delawareans across generations. Delaware Libraries partner with Cindy and Literacy Delaware in the National Communities of Excellence, which Cindy mentioned. It uses the Baldrige framework for collective impact, and it's facilitated by Peggy Geisler from PMG Consulting. We'd like to acknowledge and thank Lowell Cruz and Stephanie Norling, who are here with us today from the National Communities of Excellence. We thank them for guiding us in our journey. We're developing a Delaware literacy dashboard across the lifespan from birth through adult, with the goal to include all literacy efforts in Delaware, to identify gaps and opportunities to improve impact. We aim to connect all libraries and all organizations for seamless literacy solutions. A number of other organizations are working with us so far, and we hope you'll all join us too. We can't afford to leave any Delawarean behind, any of them. I will now turn this over to fellow Literacy Delaware board member, Dan Cruz from United Way, who will introduce our keynote speaker. Dan, over to you.
Thanks, Annie, appreciate it. Thanks, Cindy. So on behalf of the board of directors, the staff, and all of our network at Literacy Delaware, it's my pleasure to introduce Rebecca Dyer, Senior Advisor to the President and CEO for the Barbara Bush Foundation, as our keynote today. Rebecca has worked for the foundation since January of 1998 in a variety of leadership roles. After retiring from her position as Chief Mission Officer, and by the way, I love that title, in June 2020, Becky now serves as the Senior Advisor to the President and CEO. In this current role, she provides counsel on the effective design, development, and scaling of evidence-based adult and family literacy programming, incubation of new and innovative solutions through technology, research and evaluation efforts, and of course, professional development, professional learning. Her career spans nearly 40 years with significant experience in public school adult education, including service as an adult basic education teacher, local adult education program director, and state director of adult education in Maine. Becky served as the director of the Maine Family Literacy Initiative for the Barbara Bush Foundation for many years and has provided technical assistance to state adult ed leaders on policy and career pathways. During her tenure at the Maine DOE, M-A-I-N-E, DOE, her team created the successful College Transitions Network and Work Ready programs for the state. Becky is the recipient of the Gerald N. Levasseur Award for Outstanding Leadership and Rotary District 7780 Service Above Self Award. Becky earned her BS from State University of New York at Potsdam and earned her master's in Human Resource Development at the University of Southern Maine. She is a native of Maine. She and her husband, Don, live in Lymington, I may have mispronounced that, Maine. So again, it's my pleasure to introduce Becky, and at this point, I will turn it over to her. Welcome, Becky.
Thank you, Dan. I'm very excited to be here with all of you today to talk about the National Action Plan for Adult Literacy. Next slide. Over the next half hour, I'd like to talk to you about three things: the critical importance of adult literacy, why the Barbara Bush Foundation created the National Action Plan and what the plan includes, and how Delaware can lead by example in addressing low literacy. Next slide. Low literacy exists everywhere, all across the country and across all demographic groups. It's persistent and pervasive. More than half of adults read below a 6th grade level, and about 43 million Americans, nearly 1 in 5 of us, read below a 3rd grade level. And low literacy should matter to all of us because it reduces income, health, civic engagement, and it poses huge costs on society. So improving literacy at scale can have massive benefits in terms of higher workforce productivity, savings, and most importantly, quality of life for families. Now, I just want to make a little side statement here. We know at the Barbara Bush Foundation that adults have different knowledge, abilities, and life experiences, and it's degrading to compare adult learners to first graders or second graders or third graders. We've chosen to use grade level estimates in the National Action Plan to make the issue more understandable to the general public and to potential funders. It's not ideal, and we're always open to other ways of succinctly explaining the issue. Next slide. While low literacy is a pressing need, we also have an unprecedented opportunity at this time. According to a study done by Dr. Jonathan Rothwell, the principal economist at Gallup, the US economy could generate an additional $2.2 trillion a year if all adults could read at or above the 6th grade level. Now that's probably never going to happen, but the potential is there for us to dramatically increase our GDP. The COVID pandemic has hurt people with low literacy probably disproportionately and made it harder for some to get to work or access the supports that they need. But it's also created opportunities for us. It's forced many literacy programs to offer remote digital learning options, which has allowed some adult learners to engage when they maybe otherwise couldn't have. There are still a lot of challenges, including a need to improve digital literacy, but we believe the opportunity to reach and teach adults with low literacy at scale has never been more promising than it is right now. Next slide. To understand how we go about seizing that opportunity, the Barbara Bush Foundation created a national action plan. You may ask us why? Why did you create the National Action Plan? Well, when we look at the adult literacy space, we see three things. First, we see a lot of really smart, knowledgeable, and seriously dedicated people like yourselves who deeply understand adult learners' challenges and needs, as well as their strengths and their courage. People who work very hard every day and often under difficult conditions to help adult learners achieve their goals. I've dedicated my 40-year career to serving adult learners in Maine and nationally, so I truly understand how hard you work and how complex the challenges are. Second, there's a chronic lack of funding in adult education. In the plan, we estimate that governments spend less than $440 per adult learner per year, versus an average of about $14,500 per K-12 student per year. That's just 2.5%. And apart from Dollar General and the Barbara Bush Foundation, there are no major national foundations that make adult literacy a primary target of their spending. The money that governments, the private sector, foundations, and donors all spend on adult literacy is a tiny drop in the bucket compared to the size and scope of the challenge. Third, there's an apparent lack of meaningful systems level impact. Whether you're an adult educator, a program leader, a researcher, a funder, your work makes a real difference in the lives of adult learners. Everyone understands the transformative power of literacy, but are we making impact at scale? In other words, in numbers big enough to make a real lasting reduction in the rates of low literacy? We don't seem to know for sure whether literacy has improved, declined, or stayed the same in over the past 30 years. We know that adult literacy programs only serve a small fraction of people who could use their services, and that number seems to be decreasing. At least it's not certainly rising as far as we know. Mrs. Bush asked me personally in 2015, as we celebrated the 25th anniversary of the Barbara Bush Foundation, if we were making a difference. She said, in 25 years, have the numbers changed? I knew we were impacting the lives of families that participated in our programs, but I also knew that we didn't seem to be making a dent in the national numbers. They were still the same or even a little higher. I could make a case for continuing what we were doing, but I didn't know how we as one single organization would ever be able to reach 43 million people. And that's what this National Action Plan is all about. Given that this is the state of the field, the primary goal of the plan is to bring new resources into the cause of adult literacy, so we can make meaningful, lasting impact at scale in improving reading and writing skills. The secondary goal, which supports the primary goal, is to lay out an initial blueprint for getting there. Next slide. This process began 2 years ago at the National Summit when the Byra Bush Foundation asked the 250 people in attendance to identify the 5 most critical needs for adult education. We then asked participants to volunteer on working groups to lay out what was needed in those 5 areas. Those areas were equity and access, data and decision-making, professional development, research and evaluation, and serving the incarcerated. There were a lot of great ideas. The 5 working groups produced about 130 pages of them. The Byra Bush Foundation team condensed all of that into a draft plan of about 35 pages and shared the draft back out with as many of the original working group members as we could, as well as people who were new to the process, to get fresh perspectives. We talked with policymakers, employers, educators, ed tech innovators and investors, funders, and most importantly, adult learners themselves from all around the country. Perhaps the most often stated guidance was that we make the National Action Plan actionable and succinct. All of those conversations helped us clarify the language, confirm the facts, and consider new ideas. And they pointed out 2 big issues. All of those recommendations cost money, and it wasn't clear where that money would come from. Also, it wasn't clear who exactly would carry all of them out. So we refocused the National Action Plan on attracting resources and accepting responsibility. Next slide, please. We now have a clear vision of what success looks like. In our view, it's a country where every adult can easily access high quality, effective support to improve their reading, writing, digital, and numeracy skills, regardless of who and where they are. Bringing this vision to life means achieving 3 goals at the same time: expanding access, improving quality, increasing uptake, addressing both supply and demand for adult literacy support. Next slide. The National Action Plan lays out 5 areas for collective action, and they all reinforce each other. Next slide. Engage adult learners. One thing we heard repeatedly from legislators, lobbyists, and lots of others is that adult learners make the best advocates. Funders and policymakers want to hear not only facts and figures, but also personal stories of transformation. But adult learners are more than just advocates and awareness builders. They should not just be partners, but actually leaders in every one of the areas outlined in the NAP. We are not merely subjects of our research. They are not really merely subjects of our research, but should help decide what gets researched in the first place and help guide our efforts. Adult learners must be engaged in designing professional development for programs for literacy instructors and innovative new ed tech platforms and delivery approaches. To put it very clearly, our efforts under this National Action Plan to bring about transformative impact at scale will not succeed unless we center the voices of adult learners and empower them as leaders of our movement. So this initiative underpins all of the others. Raise awareness and advocate for change. Adult literacy is a hard sell, as I'm sure many of you know, for a lot of reasons. Compared to other priorities, we need to work together to make the case for literacy more proactively and more persuasively. More funding begins with more awareness and greater appreciation of the importance of adult literacy among key influencers. Also, most of the working group's efforts focused on the supply side of the adult literacy question. How do we increase access and quality? But there's also a demand side. Many, maybe even most adults with low literacy don't even identify as such. And even if they do, might not see it as such a big deal. This isn't a case of just build it and they will come. We have to actively encourage people to put in the effort needed to improve their literacy skills while making it as easy as possible for them to do so. Expand outcomes-focused research. Many experts have worked really hard with scarce resources to deliver rigorous evidence-based research on what works and what doesn't in serving adult learners. But the fact that we don't really even know whether the literacy rates have improved or not over the past 10, 20, 30 years, for example, how those adults who seek out services differ from those who don't, reflects the chronic lack of funding and shows that there's still a lot of work to be done. We also know that we need to make sure that research is translated into professional development for teachers. Support adult literacy instructors. Our frontline soldiers, our first responders, if you will, are the real heroes of this story. As some of you know painfully well, adult basic educators are capable and committed and way underpaid and undersupported. We want to bring together and build upon all the great work that COABE, Pro Literacy, American Library Association, and others have been doing to really raise the status of the profession and make sure literacy instructors are equipped with the absolute best tools available to do their jobs. Invest in innovation while scaling proven approaches. One of those tools is mobile technology. The pandemic forced a lot of natural experiments in blended, remote, and asynchronous learning techniques. And there's exciting new research coming out on these topics almost every week. As the NAP cites, only 10% or so of adults with low literacy are currently receiving services. To reach the other 90%, technology has to be a part of the solution. We're already seeing all around the country how existing programs are leveraging technology to increase their reach and their impact. But innovation doesn't mean just technology. It means bringing literacy support to people wherever they are. All of this means partnerships, just like the one you are all forming. All of these initiatives are mutually reinforcing. Increased awareness will generate funding for research, for example. And the results of that research can be used to further increase awareness and attract more funding. Research informs professional development, which can guide innovation, which in turn provides new content for research and professional development while further increasing awareness. The idea is that by coming together and taking a systems approach to the challenge of adult literacy, we can turn what has been a vicious cycle of underfunding and neglect into a virtuous circle where early wins generate further successes. Next slide. To carry out the National Action Plan, we just launched All In. All In stands for the Adult Literacy and Learning Impact Network. It's made up of coordinating council and a core team. The coordinating council includes senior people from 15 leading organizations in adult literacy, including adult learners, as well as foundations, government agencies, corporate partners, and employers, serving as champions, guides, movement leaders, as well as the governing body for the core team. The core team is a small team of professionals tasked with implementing the National Action Plan. It will mobilize resources, facilitate cooperation, broker partnerships, and report progress. The core team will report to the coordinating council and ideally could include staff on secondment from other organizations. But the consortium team can't do all of this work on its own. The vision is that it will bring together and work with different advisory panels, task forces, ad hoc working groups to achieve the National Action Plan's objectives. This is the idea of collective impact, bringing together in a coordinated way the vast resources represented in just this conference, along with many, many others, to generate systems change and meaningful, lasting results at scale. Next slide. To achieve large-scale impact, All In will support and engage local communities to leverage partnerships across networks. Place-based solutions and face-to-face interactions are necessary for meeting learners where they are. Partnerships in workplaces, places of worship, courthouses, and even barbershops could significantly move the needle on program uptake and ensure there is equitable access to those services. By gaining greater access to potential learners, sharing tools, and coordinating state efforts, the whole becomes bigger than the sum of its parts. Next slide. We also know that Literacy Delaware is currently launching a collective impact place-based initiative with the libraries, and we are excited to see this initiative unfold. Delaware also has a unique advantage that positions it not only to lead in adult literacy efforts, but to exemplify how those community-based approaches are the key to success. You can draw from past examples which lay out a blueprint for Delaware to move forward and ensure the success of the program. Delaware is the second smallest state by land area and fourth smallest by population, making travel time short and allowing for easier collaboration with donors and decision makers. Even within this audience, we have adult educators, librarians, funders, legislators, all in one room. You can build from Literacy Delaware's strong track record. And for example, in the past year, 80% of learners achieved progress in reading and/or English language skills in the last program year, while 100% of learners achieved at least one goal in the last program year. As you go forward, we at All In and the Barbara Bush Foundation are looking forward to seeing your innovative approaches and sharing them back out to the rest of the country. As Delaware has done since 1787, when it was the first state to ratify the Constitution, it can become a national trailblazer for expanding support and awareness for adult learners. Thank you very much. Any questions?
I have one, or I can get us started, and we have some time for a few more from anyone in the audience. You know, in Delaware, we figured out from a data perspective, and we're woefully probably inadequate in collecting our data, right? That we have about 200,000 individuals who meet this criteria of what you're speaking today. And we only really address less than probably 3% of that population. As I was doing research across the United States, most of the coalitions that were statewide really looked at the K through 12. Can you give us some advice as well as some ideas about how we can elevate through funding and make this a priority? I know we're going to join your All In because we're all in, but I think what we're going to really struggle with is trying to help support and scale the infrastructure needed to start addressing some of these issues. And if you have ideas of how we can really a battle cry for some of our funders and others to understand the economic pain points that you've outlined here, I'd be really appreciative to hear what some of those strategies might be.
Well, I think that probably the people who are better positioned to tell you what the strategies are cities like Houston. The Mayor's Office of Adult Literacy in Houston has just launched their literacy blueprint. So I would suggest that you get a copy of that. And if you need to have me do this, I can send you Federico's email address. David Rosen told us a couple of weeks ago that Nashville has a collective impact initiative for adult education, and they're in their second year, I believe, or third year. So I would suggest talking to other cities that are doing something similar. I know that just yesterday we discussed on a call with our core team some things that we could do to help Delaware or any other city that wants to move forward. And I think we're going to try to put together some kind of a, I don't want to call it a handbook, but some guidance on how to take on collective impact.
Right. One of the things that occurs to me when you're talking and works really well is getting a couple of us who are doing some of this work from a statewide impact together collaboratively, share those best practices, and then maybe learn from each other. So we look forward to that if you guys are going to move in that direction. So are there other, yeah, great. Are other questions? I want to make sure if anyone has some questions, we have a few more minutes before we need to move on in our program.
There aren't any questions at the moment, but Scott put a link to the Adult Literacy Blueprint in the chat. So thank you, Scott, for doing that.
Thanks,
I have a comment.
Sure.
I really like the idea of involving those that do struggle with literacy. That's very important. However, how do we overcome the stigma, whether it be English proficient, quote unquote, students or learners, and also speakers of other languages? How do we get to have them realize that this is something that the educational system has been involved with as far as failing them? And how can we make them know that we value their input because they need to be the major stakeholder. And then ultimately that would fall upon us.
Well, I certainly would welcome help from David or Michelle or Eric on this one, but my view is that you meet them where they are. You find them at their barbershop, at the local hangouts. You meet them there and you work with them at their level. To ask an adult learner to come into a school is a terrifying thing. I've had I had one adult learner when I was the assistant director in a program come in with his wife. He just lost his trucking job and he was terrified. And I tried to be as patient and kind and compassionate as I could and signed him up for classes. And the next day his wife came in and said he wouldn't be attending classes because he'd had a heart attack. He was so stressed out over seeing me that he literally had a heart attack. So I think we need to find those places in the community where they're comfortable and meet them there, and not being expecting them to come to us. But David and Michelle and Eric, if you have other suggestions, I'd love to hear them.
I'm happy to jump in. This is Michelle Dietrich. Just one that comes to mind, I think we're talking about reducing the stigma, is having adult learners as part of your programs really involved in helping other adult learners. So having adult learner advocates, having them go out and speak in the public. It's a way for other adult learners who see themselves in that person, realize that they are not alone. They're not part of a minority. There are a lot of people out there like them. And I also think one of the other things too is that when we're speaking about things with any kind of collateral that we're sending out or any kind of messages, talking about adult learners and what it can do for our country in an asset-based model versus talking about them being low literate or unfortunate and making them feel like they're not succeeding. Talking about the things that they can do and the way that their lives can change, and really ultimately breaking the cycle of low literacy from generation to generation. I think those are some of the things that come to mind, but I welcome to hear what David or Eric says also.
Yeah,
I'll jump in here. Oh, go ahead, Eric.
Oh, thanks, David. I'll be real quick. I would agree with everything you've said. I do think that language that we use is extremely important when we're talking about, how we're serving people and how we're working with people, and that asset-based piece where, people are people and they have all kinds of good things to offer, right? And this is oftentimes there's this piece that's missing, and we're seeing that with things like digital literacy and others too, where there's just this piece that needs to be shored up. And I think that, I think we've talked about language makes a difference, and also you're right, Becky, where we meet them is important. People are used to failing in places where we're asking them to come. And I think that we're clearly not succeeding in doing this. And so this conversation is exactly what we need to be having.
I'd like to add to that, both Becky and Eric and Michelle, this is really an important theme that our field needs to think about. How can we reach people who can't, for one reason or another, come to a formal adult ed program? And one way to do it is through something called learning circles. These have been offered in adult education actually for decades, called study circles in some cases. But the 21st century version of this learning circle model involves online and in-person instruction. And over the past several years, 3, 4, 5 years at this point, World Education has taken the lead in, I think, 10 states now, to help adult ed programs and libraries, I might add, to offer learning circles to people who really are not sure they want to take a course or may not be able to, but who could, for example, come to one in-person or perhaps online in the case of the pandemic, face-to-face meeting a week, and could also do online learning in between. So that's something to explore. There are ways to do that. You could contact me. I'll provide you with lots of access to resources. You could contact World Education, Priyanka Sharma, who is the head of the literacy division there. can tell you about all the things they have been doing and are continuing to do.
This is Greg. If I could ask one more quick question. Great presentation, thank you. Greg O'Neill from Christiana Care in Delaware. I'm questioning if to meet the scalable needs that we have in terms of the economic impact that we all know literacy can have, I'm wondering what your thoughts are on, in addition to investments, how can we incentivize companies, governments, insurers, large entities, basically everyone in the economic ecosystem, how can they be incentivized to pay attention to this and make it part of their structure so that we can actually achieve scalability? Any thoughts on that?
That's an excellent question, and I really don't have an answer. How about the other three? Do you?
I have a couple of suggestions. One, historically, and I'm sure you'll remember this, Becky, there was a national workplace literacy initiative that incentivized programs across the country. And during the period where that was funded, I think for about a decade, there was a huge investment, private sector investment, matching the public sector investment. We might explore doing that again. The other is that there is a very interesting model with a company called Tyson Foods that you may have heard of. They have made a major commitment to all of their employees, and they partner with adult basic education programs. So there are a couple of models, and they're not the only ones. McDonald's, for example, has a tremendous service to their English language learners in particular in the restaurants. So there are some models, but your point is well taken, which is how can we make these better known and scale them up?
It's an excellent question.
Yeah. Other questions or comments? Because we really appreciate the dialogue. I think we learned just as much through our discussions here as we do from the presentations themselves. Anyone else have any thoughts or questions?
Peggy, this is Dan. More of a thought or a comment around part of the conversation around taking the resources and the methods to the people, meeting them where they are, building that trust. To tease out a little bit of a Delaware example, you know, we talked about going to houses of worship, but what works really well in Delaware is our community-based organizations. Many of them are on the line with us today, already have that built-in trust. So the need to take on the effort to build the trust takes time and focus and human capital. We have that already in existence in many community-based organizations that are hyper-localized, where because of the services they provide, whether there's a literacy challenge, whether there's a financial challenge, they're ready to open up because they've already opened up. I'm thinking of examples like the Latin American Community Center, First State Community Action, the State of Delaware and United Way Stand By Me program. On the ground, our local Habitat for Humanities as well. So embedding a cohesive plan in a handful of pilot or anchor CBOs is something that we've done before with other initiatives across the state. It's an asset that we have when we talk about leveraging Delaware's unique advantages, not just geographically, but because of the history, putting those two, history and geography, together. We've got the template there that we could move on for something like this. So Delaware folks know this, but I'm tying a few points together that the national folks shared and some of the local folks know as well.
No, and Dan, I think you're absolutely correct. And with our size, I think to Ms. Dyer's point earlier, with our size and this initiative from the Communities of Excellence with Dr. Norman and Cindy Schermeyer as co-chairs and putting together, we're working towards a dashboard and a comprehensive plan currently. That I think you're correct. We have the footprint to mobilize some of the best practices. And I think we have an interest in the workforce landscape. I think the engagement, I'm trying to remember who gave that best practice that we're talking about, how to engage the employers. I think that was Dr. Rosen giving some examples, which I want to appreciate Alta Porterfield put the link in there about the Tyson group. I think we can take some of those when we're putting that plan together to inform those practices and that deployment. So I think these are really great discussions. I want to see if there are any other last minute questions before we start to move on in our program. I think this has been a good dialogue. I'm really excited. I think we're going to be all in, Becky. I think
Good.
we're all in as a state, and we want to create that model. And we really want to learn through your organization and others on how to do it. So
I did
any
notice,
last minutes? Go ahead.
I did notice one thing that came up in the chat from Philanthropy Delaware about visually noting the economic impact of low literacy, a one-pager showing data. The Barbara Bush Foundation has, I think about 2 years ago, maybe 2.5 years ago, did a literacy gap map. It's currently on our website. And we're in the process of working with someone from the American Libraries Association to update all of that data and improve it. So keep watching for it, but we will have something out, I would say, within the next year that updates that adult literacy gap map and includes some of the things that they're looking for.
That'll be really helpful. And we've put together from a state perspective what we think the cost is. What we're trying now to do is a forecast on the cost of the loss of earnings in addition. So what is the return on investment when someone is able to incrementally increase their level and get a higher paying job? And so, you know, I think funders are interested in that. And as we get closer to some of those one-pagers for us from an internal perspective, we can share it with you as a model, what you may be doing from more of a national perspective. And hopefully that information can inform our funders. So in the interest of time, I believe we're going to start moving forward. If you have additional questions, put them in the chat. And if we can't answer them or get to them today, we'll be sure to make sure that we follow up in some way, shape, or form. All right.
Well, I believe it's my turn now to introduce someone who I think we all know and appreciate, which is Peggy Geisler. Peggy Geisler is one of our moderators today. And as I mentioned, she is a facilitator for our communities of excellence. In addition to all that, Peggy is the owner and senior consultant of PMG Consulting. She works with nonprofits and businesses on infrastructure, strategic planning, and collective impact initiatives across community landscapes. PMG consultants assess, design, and coach implementation strategies to address community social issues in the Northeast and beyond. She is a licensed consultant for the Standards of Excellence Institute for Maryland Association of Nonprofits and DANA, the Delaware Alliance for Nonprofit Advancement. She has 25 years of experience in community development work in high-need communities, as well as strategic planning for the nonprofit field. And back to you, Peggy.
So I have the honor today. I'm going to read the bios for each of these presenters, and respectfully, they're going to give you a 7 to 8 minute presentation. And at the end of that, we have some questions, and we're going to take some audience questions for this panel. And we kind of already started that, which I really love the feel of this. Hope everyone is enjoying this as much as I am at this point. I think I'm learning a lot. I think this is a great forum. But I do have the honor. First person I'm going to introduce is Michelle Dychik. She is the Senior Director of the Programs for Pro Literacy, located in Syracuse, New York. She's responsible for the overall strategic direction and management of Pro Literacy's domestic and international initiatives, including professional development, membership, advocacy efforts, organizational events, and grant projects that support the mission of Pro Literacy. Michelle has been with Pro Literacy in different capacities for 29 years. She has attended State University at Delhi in New York, studied business and office technologies. She previously served as Vice President of the National Coalition for Literacy and continues to serve as the coalition's policy chair. Our next presenter after Michelle is Eric Neesham. He is the former Executive Director of Literacy Minnesota and currently the Interim Managing Director of Digital Strategies for Literacy Minnesota. This new and expanding division of the organization houses North Star Digital Literacy, national partnerships, and digital navigation. He's on the steering committee of the Open Door Collective, the board of the National Coalition for Literacy, and co-chair of eBase, which is evidence-based adult education system, which promotes and advocates for more resources around research in the field. Eric has been involved in literacy for 32 years and looks forward to a world where life-changing learning is within everyone's reach. I love that. And then last but not least is Dr. David Rosen, was the director of the Adult Literacy Resource Institute at the University of Massachusetts, Boston from 1986 to 2003. As an independent consultant since 2003, in the past 5 years, he's provided consulting, advising, and professional development services to the World Education EdTech Center, the Illinois Digital Learning Lab, Pro Literacy International, Friends of Liberia Family Literacy Initiative, Professional Development System for Adults Foundational Educational Practitioners, sponsored by the U.S. Department of Education. He is the co-author of 2 online guides on blended learning for adults' basic skills education. For decades, a major theme of his work has been engaging ways to integrate technology and adult foundational education online, in person, including for adult basic education, adult secondary education, and English for speakers of other languages. We have an amazing lineup here today. We are excited by all of these speakers, and we are going to hand it off for Michelle to get us started. Michelle.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. Thank you, Peggy, and thank you, Cindy, for inviting me to this. I'm really happy to participate, and I'm glad we're bringing everybody together. In short, for those who aren't aware of what Pro Literacy does, our mission is changing lives and communities through the power of adult literacy. So through our membership network, we support over 1,100 programs across the United States, in all 50 states and in DC. We also do some international work as well. And we also have a publishing division, New Readers Press, who many of you might be aware of, and that's been around for about 60 years, publishing instructional materials specifically for the needs of adult learners. And I did just want to mention that, piggybacking on what Becky had said, Pro Literacy participated in the National Action Plan task groups and now has representation on the Coordinating Council as well. So we've been following that every step of the way, and we are also all in. Next slide. Cindy asked me to talk about a few of the initiatives that Pro Literacy has that are really correlate well with the National Action Plan. And some of them are absolute naturals, and some we are looking forward to starting in a new area. But I looked very closely at Becky's presentation and realized the Barbara Bush Foundation's goals, which are outlined as part of the National Action Plan, are very much in alignment with Pro Literacy's theory of change that we follow. These are, excuse me, our 3 intermediate goals. So the first one is very much in alignment, increasing access to educational resources for adults, meeting adults where they are, finding ways to reach adults outside of the traditional adult education system, improving the effectiveness of adult literacy programs and efficiency. This is a major goal for Pro Literacy around all of our professional development efforts. And our third is increasing adult education funding, not only from governmental sources, but also from individual donors, foundations. And so we do a lot of work and advocacy in that area. And that, of course, as Becky had mentioned, these are all really mutually reinforcing. So the advocacy that we do is ultimately to be able to reach new learners in different ways and to help programs be more effective so that they can reach more learners and move learners through the system more quickly. Next slide. So Becky had already mentioned each of the 5 areas of focus for the National Action Plan, and I just wanted to talk about a few of the initiatives and projects that Pro Literacy works on that align with that. So engaging adult learners as movement leaders, extremely important, and I think all national organizations can do more of this. Many of you are aware of Value USA, led by Marty Finster-Bush, an adult learner himself. And so Pro Literacy has partnered with Marty and Value USA on a number of initiatives. One right now that we're working on is offering a leadership training that was developed by Value to organizations across the United States. And that leadership training is designed to help adult literacy providers improve their programming, but with a special emphasis on including adult learners as part of that planning process. But we do focus on making sure that adult learners are part of every testing and piloting process for anything that we provide, whether it's professional development, free resources for students. We want to make sure that adult learners' voices are represented, and that we're meeting the needs of those diverse types of adult learners. We already mentioned raising awareness and advocating for change. Pro-literacy does this on a regular basis, along with other national organizations, of course, like NCFL, COABE, ALA, Barbara Bush Foundation. One recent, about a year and a half recent, was an advocacy toolkit for adult education and literacy that we developed in partnership with David Rosen and a couple others. And that is a comprehensive adult advocacy toolkit that doesn't just focus on governmental funding. It focuses on state funding at the state level, at the local level with your local legislators, but also with corporate foundations, with family foundations, and also with advocacy with individual donors. We think that it's really important for adult education programs to have that diverse sources of funding. And so we focus very much on that. Along with that, we're launching a new initiative focused on encouraging corporate and foundation funding sources, both at the national level. As Becky mentioned, there's Dollar General. There aren't too many Dollar Generals out there. We need to find more of them and engage them and find more resources out there, large funding resources that can help local adult programs. But we also want to engage local foundations and help local providers engage local foundations and local corporations that can be supporting them. And pro-literacy, while we support both WIOA funded programs and community-based programs that are privately funded, we think it's a major responsibility of ours to be focusing very much on corporate and foundation for funding sources for local programs. Switching gears to expanding outcomes-focused research. Pro-literacy does not conduct a lot of research itself, but we realized along the way that we need to partner with researchers along the way. There's a lot of great research out there on adult literacy and providing services. Much of it is a little old, so we do need to invest more in additional research going forward. But we also think it's really important for adult education research to be shared with the world. There's a lot of research out there that people aren't sure where to find at this particular point. So Pro-literacy is really proud to be able to try to publish some of that research and use our network of 1,000 member programs and an additional 3,000 publishing customers to share it and to help with the professional development that goes along with that. One way we do that is with our adult literacy education research journal, which is offered 3 times a year for free. It's a peer-reviewed research journal. We've recently produced some research briefs. We have about 7 of them right now, and they're on different topics related to adult education, including student motivation, inclusivity in the classroom, digital technologies. And so we also have an accompanying PD initiative to help organizations understand how to use that research in their day-to-day practice. We've published research papers thanks to eBay's and ODC, Open Door Collective. A great group of researchers did a lot of interviewing and surveying of programs across the United States on how to focus on COVID and the changes that resulted from that. What were the challenges that they faced and how do they rise to that challenge? So Pro-literacy produced that paper, and we will be having a follow-up of that as well to find out what practices will stay around, what practices we can continue to practice throughout the instructional organizations. And we're also just touching on something, we just had an initial meeting around this, but we're exploring a partnership with Syracuse University in archiving of adult education research out there. We know that there are a lot of entities that held this research and housed it, but they're now in different places, and there is no one central place that adult education organizations can go to use this research for their daily with learners. And so Pro-literacy is looking into how we can fix that. Supporting adult literacy instructors, and this really speaks to the improving the effectiveness and efficiency of adult literacy programs nationwide. Pro-literacy Education Network is our professional development portal, and we have over 800 resources on that, from a local template to a budget to training videos, our tutor training, online courses. It has a lot of different things that local programs can use, both instructors and administrators and trainers as well. Learning from a distance training, which will be launched in the fall, it speaks to a little bit of what David and Becky had talked about in meeting learners where they are. So we learned from the pandemic that there were some great practices that came out and some great innovations that local programs found in reaching learners very differently. So whether that is from learning circles to blended learning, synchronous, asynchronous options, that training will be available in the fall for free to adult education programs. We have our tutor training that was built about 5 years ago, and we're beginning to expand on some specific professional development offerings that dig into some pain point topics for instructors, helping them dig into each of those and expand on their knowledge in those areas to best meet the needs of a diverse set of learners. And then, of course, as I mentioned, we have New Year's Press, our publishing division, and we're embarking on some new initiatives to launch some new products in ESL, in workforce resources, and also continuing to offer more digital products to meet the needs of learners that are changing every day. We're investing in innovation while scaling proven approaches. This is the one I think that could cross over all of these as the others do. But Pro Literacy has 2 specific grant programs that we wanted to point out. Mobile Learning Fund is the mobile component to Pro Literacy's National Book Fund, which has been around for about 26 years. And that is using donated funds to try to get New Year's Press mobile products into the hands of adult learners. And so we think it's our responsibility to try to help local programs when they often have to cut materials budgets to help them get those so they can continue to innovate and use different resources with students. And also just new about 6 months ago, the Literacy Opportunity Fund. This is a partnership with the Nora Roberts Foundation in which Pro Literacy is distributing grants for general operating expenses. And this could be for any literacy organization, any expense to help local programs expand their offerings. And David Rosen really did a good job of talking about learning circles. I don't even have to explain that now. Thank you, David. But Pro Literacy wants to continue to expand, whether it's distance learning, blended, high flex, using learning circles, virtual learning circles. We want to continue to expand on those and provide new resources on a continual basis. And one of the other areas where we have focused heavily on are providing free student resources. So there are a lot of materials out there that are at a cost that programs need to pay for those. And Pro Literacy wants to continue to expand and provide as many for free as we can to programs. We know that many adult literacy organizations are providing digital products, and we are also a proud supporter of the Barbara Bush Foundation's X Prize winner Learning Upgrade. So we provide that through our publishing division, but we're also partnering with them on many ways to reach new types of learners, whether it's with a domestic violence center, refugee resettlement programs. So we really believe that we're using that to help increase the literacy skills of those individuals, but also meeting them where they are, which is outside of the traditional adult education system. And knowing that, of course, there's what we've come to know as binge learning, where students are going to class, but then they're maybe spending 10 minutes, 20 minutes in the evening, every evening, adding on to that, which is really showing a lot of promise in expanding, I should say, facilitating a faster process for learners to reach their goals. So those are just some. I know I went through those very quickly. I don't want to take up too much more of my time. If you go to the next slide, I assume this PowerPoint will be shared out with all participants, and each of these resources that I mentioned previously has a link so that you can go and find it and explore it. And I put my email at the bottom, so please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions about any of those.
Thank you, Michelle. And yes, we will. And don't forget, people will be back and able to ask you questions as soon as we get done with the other panelists and their presentations. And we'll be moving forward now with Eric.
Yeah, thank you. I switched to my phone. I'm having a little bit of internet connectivity issues, so I'm hoping my phone is a little bit better. Let me know if I'm struggling here, so I won't turn my camera on. Thank you so much for inviting me. This is a great forum for this conversation. And I really appreciate it being built around sort of this conversation that the Barbara Bush Foundation has brought to us. I was at the initial forum a little over 2 years ago, and I find it enheartening that we're having this conversation and talking about some of the issues that our field is up against. And I would agree with Becky that my presentation is going to be very uplifting, I hope, but I would agree that we are struggling with some very serious issues in our field, and we have to address them. We have to take a hard look at them. Go ahead to the next slide. That one, exactly. Thank you. So let me just talk a little bit about who my organization is and kind of what we've been up to. So we're having our 50th anniversary this year. So we grew up, Literacy Minnesota grew up in that great tradition of Frank Laubach and all the literacy councils that started way back when. And we as an organization grew up a little differently, I think, than many. We ended up closely tied to WIOA and some of the state work that's being done. And you know, I think in many ways still own that tradition. We're a very volunteer-based organization. We've owned some of the technology pieces throughout the years. And so we're the group that our state looks to for technology. We run the data system for the state. We run a statewide hotline. And so we're, you know, in some ways we're very similar to Literacy Delaware, and maybe some ways we're not as similar. We also, along the way, embraced technology in a fairly large way. And so some of you may have heard of us in the context of North Star Digital Literacy, which is a national, kind of international now, platform that helps assess and teach digital literacy skills to lower level, mostly adults, but some kids as well. That's something that we've been working on over the last 10 years. It's been growing. I'd love to talk more about that at some point. If people want to, you know, contact me, that's great. But for now, I want to talk a little bit more about sort of our field and what I think we need to do moving forward. And what I will say about the National Action Plan is that I would fully agree with Becky that we have not been succeeding at what we're intending to do. We have not been moving the bar as a field. We are not bringing in the resources we need. We may not even be having the conversations we need to have. And so this National Action Plan is actually a very good starting point for all of those things. And I think it brings up a lot of the issues that we need to talk about. And I'm appreciating it because it gives me the opportunity to do some cheerleading as well around that. So what I'm going to spend some time on is talking about change and abundance thinking. So as you see there, my quote, change is good, like everybody says, right? Change is good. And then I have to add on that little piece, as long as it's good. It's not always good. So go ahead to the next slide. So as you've heard, adult basic education is historically underfunded, always has been. We sort of just live with it. We try hard to get more federal funding. We you know, as our organizations, obviously, and many of you are in part organizations that are not necessarily literacy, but similar, that are always writing grants, you know, trying to piece things together. Our funding system is wholly underfunded. You know, the federal funding that comes through WIO is not a lot. Most states don't have a lot of funding for adult education. And we don't even talk enough about that. I think sometimes all we hear about is the federal funding. And honestly, I think within our states, that's probably the future in terms of at least government funding. So again, underfunded. Because of that, we think about scarcity all the time. That's in our DNA. We're scrimping and saving. I constantly have to have conversations with my staff about, you know, I have a great example of somebody coming to one of our learning centers in Minnesota and saying, what do you guys need? What can I help you with? And the learning center coordinator thought about it really hard and then said, we need pencils, we need paper. Well, ultimately, I was able to get involved in that conversation. And ultimately, we ended up getting $40,000 or $50,000 to help fund one of our family literacy programs. It's just so hard to think about, you know, when you're busy thinking about on the ground, what a learner needs, it's hard to think about those bigger picture pieces that other people are actually thinking about. And I get that we're scrappy. We are very scrappy as organizations, but we also need to think differently. We need to have more self-esteem. And I think we should, because of who we are and what we do. I'm in some ways, I think there's a silver lining around the pandemic in the sense that it has changed everything. It's changed the way that everyone thinks, and it's changed the way we think and have to think. So I think what I think it's done is brought to light the fact that digital literacy is part of literacy. And we now have a whole group of people that we normally wouldn't have considered part of our, wheelhouse, that is now part of our wheelhouse. And I've always said that one of the challenges that we have as a field is that people don't feel connected to us. So like funders and the general population kind of think of us as the other, right? And so the fact that now digital literacy is part of our wheelhouse, I think has changed that. Everybody knows somebody who's not digitally literate. And even though a lot of our learners are different from that category, I think it does bring us the opportunity for more partnerships to work with different groups. And that window is open right now for us to have those conversations about funding, about who we serve, about who we partner with and how we partner. I don't want to go deeply into this, but as you start to see the funding streams flow, what we're seeing is with the Digital Equity Act, for example, billions of dollars that should be going to the skills part of this conversation, not just the devices and the broadband, but actual skills building around digital equity. And if we don't act now, we're not going to be able to access that. That's going to be coming down through every state. We have to be partnering with the right people and having the right conversations right now. And when I look at this group here, I'm fascinated and really excited because you are a group of people who are those partners. You're coming together to have this conversation. You're not just adult literacy people. You're the partners. You're the peripheral groups that need to be part of the conversation to really solve for what we need to solve. And again, the window is going to be open widely, but briefly. So I think it's imperative that we have this conversation now. Go ahead to the next slide. So I'm going to, my agency is kind of known for big picture thinking and sort of thinking, out of the box and so on. But I will tell you that I have had several experiences that I'm going to share with you real quick that will tell you that I think the same way everyone else does in some ways, and I have to learn my lessons as well. A couple of years back, when we were starting to think as an organization about sort of moving outside of our comfort zone and working in some other areas, we had an opportunity to apply for a grant to work with libraries on rural literacy programs. So work with libraries and rural literacy programs on improving their skills and so on. And so we put in this application to this foundation, and I thought this was just this monstrous grant. We put in $100,000 application to this foundation. I went in to talk to them and they said, this looks like a pretty big project. Are you sure you can do this for $100,000? I'm like, oh, okay. So we brought it back, had another conversation, and then just crossed our fingers and went back in at $200,000. And after the second and third conversation, we ended up with a $1.7 million 5-year project. That's how we think, right? We're always scrimping and saving and scrapping. And we actually need to do the work. And there are groups out there that are willing to help us do that. And then you'd think I would have learned after that. But again, I was working on upgrading North Star, the platform that we work with, right? And I was working with our our statewide workforce group, economic development group. And they were asking, how can we help you upgrade North Star? And I said, okay. So went in, and I think I was asking for $50,000 or $60,000 to do these pieces of the upgrade. Well, ultimately, I left the room with $500,000 because they had the money. We needed to do the work. And now I think I'm better at this, but I'm just giving you examples because I know you've all been through this same exact thing that I've been through. If you don't ask, you don't get. And it's not really, I think people sometimes cower because, oh, I don't want to ask because I don't know. The reality is it's not really their money. It's money that's flowing down through other means. So they're sharing. And honestly, in this day and age, with all the resources that are flowing for, you know, the ARPA money and the CARES Act money. Groups are trying to get rid of money. Honestly, they're trying to unload money, and we have to be that group that they're unloading it on. Partnerships are key. This is a perfect group to be having this conversation. I tell my staff, be at the table, go to the table, get to the table, go to the meeting. And they're like, what meeting? I said, I don't care, go to the meeting, just go. We have to be there. We have to be a face at that meeting. You know, and I guess my only other piece of advice is that we need to invest in the future. And sometimes that does take some resources to do, but ultimately we have to become who we know we can become. I like the action plan because it thinks big, it thinks bold, it makes us sort of think outside that box, and it honestly addresses some of the things that I think, you know, I've been struggling with. Are we doing our job? Can we do better? You know, how do you do better? So I appreciate the conversation, and I look forward to any questions you guys might have.
Great. Eric, thank you so much. You guys are doing great on time. So thanks for the idea of bringing everyone around the table. In Delaware, we're trying to create that table in which to bring everyone around. So we're doing both at the same time, and then not being afraid to ask for more money. And anybody who knows me knows I'm not afraid of that. So we will take that to heart. So our next presenter, last but not least, is Dr. David Rosen. He is going to be presenting, and we'll talk a little bit about the Open Door Collective and his work and his thoughts. So Dr. Rosen.
Great. Thank you. It's really a pleasure to be here. I'd like to begin actually with a comment about the leadership at the Barbara Bush Foundation. And that is that over the past year or so, they have been listening to the field. And as a result, the plan, the final version of the plan, is really inspiring. It has lots of good things in it for adult learners, for practitioners, for states and state level administrations of adult ed, and frankly, for the country as a whole. So my congratulations to the leadership. And I'm hoping that the coordinating council, which I understand has met at least once, will follow that leadership example. If so, I'm very optimistic about what can be achieved here. Let me take just a minute to talk about something that is emerging in our field, and that is a new name for the field as a whole. And the new name is Adult Foundational Education. And this is a name that my Open Door Collective colleagues and I have been using to describe our field. It certainly includes adult literacy, adult numeracy, and digital literacy, which are, of course, the focus of the National Action Plan. And incidentally, Peggy, Michelle, and Eric, and perhaps others of you here, are members of the Open Door Collective. We have about 150 members at this point across the country. And I am hoping that as the National Action Plan is introduced more widely to policymakers and to the general public, that it might be described as a plan for some of the very important areas of adult foundational education. But this is just to mention that our field includes more. And I like to think of adult foundational education as the third and newest and rising education field in our country, equal in importance to pre-K-12 and to higher education. So this is part of my vision here. And that is that we have never been taken seriously as a field compared with K-12 and higher ed. I would like to see us taken seriously and mentioned every time those fields are mentioned. Let's go on to the next slide, please. I very much like the shared vision of the plan, the action plan that you can read on this slide and maybe have already familiarized yourself with. But I would like to drill down and give you some specific comments on the plan. Of the 10 National Action Plan initiatives and actions, but I'm only going to really talk about the ones that I especially like. The first one, engaging adult learners as movement leaders. Funding and launching an adult learner leader fellowship program is a great idea. Supporting Value USA, which has learner informed and delivered programs, would be one very good way to do that. I very much like the initiative of raising awareness and advocacy for change. And I have some thoughts about that. From my experience, adult literacy and most other adult foundational education services in the country are invisible. They're not invisible to us. They're always at our site, but they're invisible to many legislators at the national and state level, and they're invisible to the general public. So this is a really important part of the action plan to me, which is to raise visibility, and so that every American and certainly every policymaker across the country is keenly aware of the adult foundational education field and adult literacy as part of that field. Incidentally, I think it would be useful to do 2 Gallup poll type surveys. One which would be a baseline data survey before that campaign, that national campaign, and then a post-awareness campaign survey to see what the extent is that the needle has moved. And we've never known that in the past. There have been campaigns in the past of varying degrees of success, but we've never actually really known in a systematic way what the impact of that campaign has been. So here's an opportunity to do that. Are more Americans, as a result of the campaign, aware of the challenges for adults who have difficulty with literacy, numeracy, digital literacy? Are they aware of the challenges for their families, employers, communities, and for our economy? Those are the kinds of questions I would hope those surveys might get at. And incidentally, to make this work, it is essential to get major employers and national media, now including, of course, social media, deeply involved in the success of this campaign. So another initiative is outcomes-focused research, to expand that. And I have some thoughts about that. As a researcher, I can tell you that we lack a full picture of how many programs and how many adult foundational education learners there are in the United States. We currently only collect data, or almost only, pro-literacy has a big effort in this that I should mention, but outside of the pro-literacy effort, all of the data that are collected on programs are through the Workforce Investment Act, Title II, the Adult Education and Family Literacy title. And we know from the pro-literacy surveys, and we know from our own experiences in adult literacy programs, that there are more learners enrolled. But how many more? It looks like the National Action Plan, at long last, may tackle that. And I'm very excited about that. Another comment on research. And some of you know this, but maybe others don't. For 2 decades, our field had federally funded national research centers focused exclusively on adult foundational education, adult literacy. The first one was the National Center for Adult Literacy at the University of Pennsylvania. It, I think, was started in the 1980s, and I think it went for about 10 years. And then the second one was the National Center for the Study of Adult Learning and Literacy, which was jointly sponsored by Harvard University and World Education. And it also had a 10-year run, started in 1997, and I think went at least till 2007. Then, unfortunately, Congress decided not to renew funding for any national adult literacy research center, and I have no idea why. But I will tell you that our field has suffered deeply from that decision ever since. Look, practitioners can't have evidence-based decision-making without evidence for those decisions. We need a national adult foundational education research center, ideally one like NICSOL, which had a strong partnership model of several universities and which paid attention to dissemination in ways that practitioners could and did actually use research for program improvement and for teacher or instructor or tutor decision-making. We need to have that again. The next initiative is support adult literacy instructors, which of course I strongly believe in. As a professional developer, I know how important this is. Creating and distributing user-friendly evidence-based training materials is absolutely fine with me. However, the larger challenge, as I mentioned, is our field has very few truly evidence-based studies, and they don't answer some of the most important questions. You might ask, well, what are those questions? I should not be the person who decides that, but I'll give you my impression of two areas. We don't know. We should know what works, for whom, for what kinds of learners, studying what, and under what circumstances. We don't have answers to those questions. We don't have the kinds of evidence that would give program leaders and instructors confidence in acting on that research. The second is having to do with digital literacy and technology. And it's questions like these: are blended learning, or what many places are now turning to a kind of blended learning called flex models, or HiFlex is a major model that many programs across the country are now exploring or actually using. But the question is, are these more effective? Are they more effective for increasing retention or persistence from a learner perspective? Are they more effective for completion of a course? Are they more effective for learning gains than pure distance learning, or more effective than in-person learning? And incidentally, you might say, well, don't we know this by now? And the answer is, we only have one study in our field, and it has looked at this question over a 10-year period. It's in Texas, and it's looked at the question of, does hybrid, not necessarily flex model, not blended model, but hybrid, which is the broader category, does it have better outcomes, better retention than pure distance learning models or in-person models? Curious? What would you expect the answer to be? Most people, when I ask that question, say, well, it has to be the in-person models. The answer is no. Over about a 10-year period, consistently, every year, looking at all of the publicly funded programs in Texas, the TEAMS group that did this, that's an acronym, found that consistently, year after year, the hybrid programs, those that blend online learning with in-person learning, did better than in-person programs and better than distance learning programs. But we need to expand that kind of study to other states. We need to look at that. Maybe it's unique to Texas. We have no way of knowing that unless we do expand that kind of research. Let's look at support for instructors. I very much think support is a tremendous importance, but there's one piece that I do have some concerns about, and that is the idea of, even though it's voluntary, a national credential program for adult literacy instructors. So I want to raise some of my concerns. One is, and some of you already know this, that states use different standards for professional development. And so if there's a national credential, that's going to be a difficult thing to do nationally, as long as those standards are different. And I don't think that's going to change. Another is, and this is something that many of you are aware of, I'm sure the case is the same in Delaware, typically 70 to 80% of the adult literacy teachers in most states are very part-time. And I don't mean just part-time, I mean very part-time. And frankly, because of that, are not interested in a credential. Another one that I'm concerned about is, and I speak from experience, I'm from Massachusetts, we have had and do have a superb credential for Massachusetts adult educators. But to do that required a serious investment of resources for the development of the program and for its continuing administration. And the problem has been, because it's voluntary, and that's the only way it ever would have been agreed to by practitioners in my state, but because it's voluntary, relatively few people have chosen to pursue this very well-developed credential. So a last comment, and this is probably pie in the sky, but I'd like to put it out there, and that is, if there were a credential, and if in some way it could guarantee a full-time job, many instructors would be interested. But so far, no state, as far as I know, is committed to that. Even my state has not been able to commit to that. So those are the challenges I see around that particular one. The last comment that I want to make is about investment in innovation. And I am thrilled, absolutely thrilled to see this in the plan. The Catalytic Grants Program to fund early stage innovations, I think, is a terrific idea. And we need innovation, and we need it not only coming from federal funding, we need it at every level. And we need to explore all kinds of alternative ways. As I mentioned earlier, for example, learning circles are just one innovation in our field that has shown some evidence of being very effective, and it needs to be implemented in other states and in programs at all levels. That's just one example. There are many innovative models that we should be exploring, and this kind of funding is the way to get it moving. So those are my comments. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share them with you, and I look forward to questions and other comments and discussion that we have time for.
Okay, so thank you, Dr. Rosen. I believe we will have some questions from our audience, but I appreciate your discussing some of the things that we know. We are probably not going to be able to volunteer our way out of this. We need a standardization and a way for people to be able to earn a living in doing this important work. If we don't take it seriously by what we do, others will not. And then oftentimes people don't always fund volunteer because it sounds like a feel good, not a need to do, but a like to do. And so I think those are all some thoughts just based on some of the things you talked about, just a few things. So there's been a lot of information shared here. I'm wondering if anyone has a question that they would like to pose to any of our presenters. I have some leading questions, but I want to see if anybody else has any questions that are burning right now. Anybody have any questions? If not, I'm going to ask a question to Eric. Eric, oh, go ahead, Annie.
Well, and Chris, my hesitation is I'm trying to figure out how to articulate the question. But I think my question is about motivation. I thought it was interesting that ProLiteracy says that they have a research paper on that, which I want to follow up to obtain that. But some of the work that we've done on basic needs, we found, and Alta's on here as well, she found, I should say, that people who need basic needs or basic support are in crisis. And so they need a lot of hand-holding. They don't have the ability or attention or whatever to attend a series of sessions. And so we were looking to see if we could develop some just-in-time tips and tricks to help people as a, to kind of get them on that learning path. But I think Becky at the beginning was saying that not everyone sees the need. So, you know, the motivation may be different than what I thought. And so I guess the question is to say a little bit more about the motivation and what you see, like the range of what you see. And then also, is there such a thing out that exists or some tips or tricks that librarians could use as they work with the public that might, you know, teach people a few things anyway?
I'd like to respond to that. First of all, there are public libraries that have really taken a huge lead in this area that I'm about to talk about, the learning circles. In fact, the Chicago Public Library several years ago piloted in, I think, most, if not all of their branches, a huge effort to make learning circles available to people in the community. And most of there was a study, it was funded and there was a study done. And so there's some really interesting outcomes. One of them was that no one who signed up for a learning circle had ever taken a learning circle before. Most people had never heard of what a learning circle was. And so why did they sign up for this? And the answer is, and this really addresses your question, is because the learning circle, the content of the learning circle was something that they wanted and needed. So right now, across the country, one of the huge needs in urban and rural communities is for access to the internet and digital literacy skills, but not necessarily in the abstract. It tends to be a very specific need. I'll give you an example that is probably familiar to all of you personally, as well as to learners, many of your learners, and that is telehealth. During the pandemic, many doctor's appointments have been done virtually using the internet. So that raises all kinds of challenges for low-income people in particular, access to the internet, period. Access to a device at home, particularly since medical teams say again and again that although smartphone access is better than nothing, it's nowhere near as good as access on a full screen where they can get much more visual information as part of the telehealth visit. Digital literacy skills. And when I say skills, I'm really talking about not only competence, but comfort. And in this age, more than comfort, courage and confidence in using a digital device and the internet to do things like telehealth. But what drives people to the learning circle is health issues, personal health, family health issues, and the need to either get health information, to use a hospital portal, or to do a telehealth visit. So we in our field need to think about this. And in our field, I'm including public libraries, which I absolutely think are in our field. We need to think about how can we meet the needs of patrons for emerging needs that they articulate and feel. Another, I mentioned health, that's a big one. Another one is jobs and ways of improving one's job or career situation. A lot of interest in that now, and learning circles are a great way to do that as well.
Great comments, Dr. Rosen. And I think one of the things that Dr. Norman's a pioneer, because we have got health literacy stations within, and health like digital, like health kiosks, working with direct lines to physicians in some of her libraries currently.
Health boost, yeah.
Yep. And and I know that Greg's on here. He's one of the chairs of Emerging Health Literacy Initiative that will also be married up to what we're doing. So I think that'll be an interesting to get more information around that and see how these two groups working together can really make a huge impact in our state. So we're going to be evolving a statewide health literacy forum around this, and it'll be married up to this initiative as well. So I think we're going to be on the cutting edge of some of that. And so thanks for those comments.
Yeah, one just quick follow-up. I am very interested in this whole area of the intersection of health and medicine, of course, as part of health, and adult basic skills or adult foundational education. And there are beginning to be some digital health navigators that are really focused on the kinds of digital literacy skills that are needed for telehealth and using health portals. Nearby, in a neighboring state of Pennsylvania, the mayor's office in Philadelphia has launched a digital health navigator model. And it has several hospitals and I believe at least one community health center that is deeply involved with this. Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, for example, has, to me, a very exciting program for its patients only, but still very exciting because of the things they're trying to do to address basic digital, really addressing health disparities around digital skills.
David, if I could,
yeah.
I've got to just add to that. Well, you know, I think Miss C in the chat mentioned that North Star has now a telehealth module. This is one of those areas that I think up until just a few years ago, we wouldn't have thought of as part of our wheelhouse, health and literacy, right? And so now here we are having these partnerships that involve maybe even HMOs and other groups that are now interested in having a conversation with us, literacy people, about how can they do their work better. And we have to have our doors open for those conversations as well. So this is one of those opportunity points.
Yeah, I think it's really exciting. We have Highmark as part of our leadership or advisory committee of our Communities of Excellence statewide literacy initiative, and some of our local hospitals like Christiana Healthcare. We recognize that it has a strong relationship there. And so, you know, having everyone around the table can make huge impact. But I think it gets back to, you know, really that also that fundamental or foundational literacy piece, right? You really need to have that. And we've been woefully inadequate in Delaware on addressing that. So, you know, this is the first step, one of the first steps as we're moving forward. So really appreciate this discussion and the far-reaching implications that literacy has on a holistic perspective of the human condition. Other questions for any of our other, Becky's still with us, Eric and Michelle and Dr. Rosen. Any questions that are burning that anyone would like to ask?
I do. I have a comment.
Sure.
Hi. My career has been with adult literacy, adult education, numeracy. I'm currently retired, but I am now volunteering for, literacy programs in Delaware. And throughout my career, I did work part-time. I juggled like 4 part-time jobs at one time just to make a substantial income, because that's what I wanted to do. I loved working with adult learners. I love, teaching and interacting and making sure that I was making a difference in folks' lives. But I found as it was difficult to become recognized and credentialed in this field. And through 30 years of learning and workshops, etc., I learned what worked best, in the programs that I was involved in. I finally did get, a full-time position for the state of Delaware. I did prison education, and I worked at, a job training program as well. But I found, and I do still think it's important to let organizations or institutions become aware of the fact that, there needs to be a learning curriculum or model for those who want to be actively engaged in teaching adult education. The skills that I've learned through, through working and experience, but it would have been nice to know that rather than just becoming certified in biology or certified in a K through 12, that there is an actual certification process or degree that one can earn. And then perhaps we don't have to work 7 part-time jobs to make
Right.
ends meet. You understand what I'm saying?
So Diana, I do, and I think that both Cindy Schermeyer can talk to that from a state perspective, but then also Michelle, I think one of the things that there was a note that, there used to be credentialing through pro-literacy, and I guess there's a question, two things to Diana Blakey's discussion is, Cindy, what can a person do from a state perspective in learning the curriculum? I know you guys have a standardized process, but then Michelle, from a national perspective, is there any idea of bringing back that credentialing that pro-literacy used to do? So those would be follow-up questions from Diana, and thank you for bringing that up, Diana.
Thank you, my pleasure.
I guess I can jump in quickly. So we had a trainer certification, and we moved away from that and focused heavily on our tutor training, which doesn't have a credential necessarily attached to it, but it's a more comprehensive look at all the skills necessary for an instructor. So that's part of the reason why we moved away from that. We also had a national accreditation system, and that was accrediting programs. And we had to move away from that, but we're now seeing that there might be an opportunity to move back towards something like that. Because we're able to before it was an actual in-person visit and an in-person evaluation of a local program. Now there are a lot more opportunities to do that virtually, and self-assessment and a lot of different things that we can add to that. So we have been discussing ways in which we can do that, which is cost effective for pro-literacy, but more importantly for local programs as well. So stay tuned. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But I also think that just kind of going back to the National Action Plan, that was one of the area of focus is professionalization of the field and some sort of credential. It's a very heavy lift. It's probably a very lengthy process, but it's worth exploring. And individual states, of course, have different certifications, so that it's hard to have a national certification. But perhaps there is a way of some sort of national credential that all of the organizations nationally can bond together and embrace. So that's not really an answer, but I think it's right now is the opportunity to be having this conversation. And
so what I'm hearing, and then we'll let Cindy talk a little bit about what they have internally here in the state, is that there is a lot more energy coming back around to how do we create this mechanism. Any field has to be recognized. In order to get, it has to be standardized in some way, recognized, and the credentialing will bring in resources because people will start to take it serious. I think getting to Dr. Rosen's comments earlier about, we need to have this adult field. It needs to be a recognized field. People need to take it serious because in the past they have or have not based on that. And so I think that discussion is really should happen from a national perspective. And then Cindy, from a state perspective, I know that you have a pretty rigorous training program.
Back when we were getting federal funding and we were part of the statewide system, I know the state did have some credentialing requirements because I accomplished that and became certified in adult basic education. I'm not quite sure the lay of the land with that right now. What we've always struggled since using volunteers is making sure that the tutor training we're offering is quality and rigorous and is based on best practices and the science of teaching reading and also with learning another language. I've always felt that it's very important that the volunteers, that we can take our training and we can stand up against other programs and say, yes, our volunteers are volunteers, but they're just as well prepared. We're always searching. So I know we've used parts of pro-literacy tutor training. We've looked at Literacy Minnesota's tutor training. In fact, I took all their training this summer, this past summer, I think, or fall. And, it would be nice to have the accreditation come back for a program, Michelle. but then also volunteer programs to figure out what is the best for training and how much does a volunteer need to know to get started so that you don't overwhelm them. And also professional development, I think, is important for volunteers because there's always something more to learn. And some of those hot buttons that I know someone mentioned earlier. So I'm interested in the NAP and what the credentialing is going to look like and how it will affect the volunteer community programs.
So we've got a couple more minutes to see if there's one or two more questions as we then start to close out today.
So I'm going to jump right in, Peggy. Mine's not actually a question. I just wanted to let everyone know I've very much enjoyed this discussion and to let people that are not involved with in Delaware here, the Delaware Libraries, to know a little bit about what Delaware Libraries has been doing in the past. My title is Social Innovator. And I've been worked with the Learning Circle programs through our state libraries workforce nationwide. We have essential needs interns that are funded by our Department of Health and Social Service, along with social workers. The essential needs are very familiar with all the social determinants of health, including the literacy issues. We're looking at digital navigators blended with the essential needs, because honestly, you can't do anything with essential needs if you don't have the computer and work with the computers itself. So this is kind of what Annie was talking before about our basic needs and learning more about all the different needs available. So we have worked, and we're very happy with North Star and with Minnesota and working with a lot of these national programs. And we're very excited on continuing on with it. And part of it is the problem, like everyone says, funding and boots, right? We need more, because I can sit in and listen to wonderful programs like this and go back and get more involved in it. But unless we have more help in that area, it's not. We need more fun. We need more. So I just wanted to bring that up. The other part about telehealth, we are the lead in telehealth in libraries nationwide. In fact, today is our nationwide facilitation group we have for the nation. And we're the only state that has the telehealth for the entire state, and we're expanding with that area itself. So I just wanted to throw all that in. But thank you guys. And I'm sorry, it's not a question, but a lot of people that know me, sometimes I need to get that little blurbs in about the state. I'm very proud of our state.
So to Alta's point, a lot of really great work going on in Delaware. And, I know that Cindy at the end, when she closes this out, if you want to get her and Dr. Norman get more involved in the Communities of Excellence work, who really a collective impact model around the statewide literacy initiative, as well as getting involved in what your local libraries are doing from a community impact point of view. Please let us know, because the more the merrier. If we're going to be all in, then we need to all be in. And if we're going to do that, we need to do it in a way that's going to really make a scalable and measurable difference in our state. Any last minute thoughts or questions before we allow Cindy to wrap this up? Going once, going, Michelle, yes.
Yeah, this is not so much a question, but just, I guess, a comment also, is that thank you for doing this. I mean, I think that this is, Becky would probably echo what I say here, but I mean, this is really interesting that you're embracing the National Action Plan and embracing all in and putting so much focus on it, inviting everybody today. So I just want to say thank you for doing that. And also, I think that one of the biggest strengths, along with everything we talked about with the National Action Plan, is not only is it a great plan, it's very innovative, it's thinking differently, but it's also bringing together these national and regional organizations. And of course, Pro Literacy works with COA, works with NCFL all the time, but this is bringing us together in a very different way. So I think that there's a real opportunity for some powerful work and some very focused attention on adult literacy as an important part of the education field. So I just wanted to add that on. So thanks for being kind of the first state to jump out and do something like this.
Absolutely. And I'm going to Emma go to the next slide for your comments, because I think one of the things that when Cindy sort of closes this out, there's a call to action from a statewide perspective, right? We here in Delaware have purposely looked at what is going on from a collective impact model from the nation and your national plan. we are aligning to the national plan so that we can create a statewide impact for that. And we're doing the same model internally as a state that you're doing externally as a nation. What that will do is create more impact for you and for us synergistically. We understand that. And so we're going to bring every power and resource to bear in our state and outside of our state to help us make literacy a priority. It has never been seen as a priority, but I think we're starting to see it that way. The work that Diane Frenzel's doing and James Spadola through the K through 12 system, what we're going to be doing for the adult system, what Greg's going to be doing through the health literacy piece, all synergized in our state to drive change. So I'm going to turn it back over to Cindy to close us out today. I like to start on time as a facilitator, and I like to end on time as a facilitator. And I want to thank our speakers, and I'm going to let Cindy turn over and thank our speakers and our sponsors.
Okay, thank you very much. In closing, I would like to again thank our sponsors, Delaware Libraries, United Way of Delaware, Highmark Health Options, and PMG Consulting. Many thanks to Becky, Michelle, Eric, and David for the valuable information they shared today based upon their extensive experience in the field. I knew we had 4 of the best presenting today, and they're somewhat of rock stars for me in the field of adult literacy. So I'm just so honored that they have joined us. Thank you to our moderator extraordinaire, Peggy Geisler. I can tell you she and her team are relentless advocates for adult literacy and have worked hard behind the scenes with this forum and in other venues. It has been such a thrill for me to see adult literacy come to the forefront in the state of Delaware as it has been. And I know that they have been a big push along with Dr. Annie Norman. I want to thank the Literacy Delaware staff members, Paula Setting, Jackie Filak, and Leslie McGowan for handling registration, marketing, and monitoring the chat. Finally, a special thank you to Emma Braun from PMG Consulting for dealing with many of the details of the planning process, creating the agenda, pulling the PowerPoints together, and keeping me on task. Dr. Norman and I believe literacy is key to an equitable Delaware. We joined forces because we believe that by creating a stronger network, building supports for adults with literacy needs and other needs, obtaining strategic funding, we can stem the tide of low literacy in Delaware so that no adult is left behind. This ends our program this morning, but I would like to leave you with just one last thought. Today you heard a call to action. And the question is, how will you respond? I hope you will think about joining us with the communities of excellence. Again, thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Cindy.
Thanks, everybody.
Our team stay on for just a minute.
Since Cindy, can you stop the recording on your computer? Or normally I know it would be the host, but since you started it for some